Visiting Indeed.com/credit.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
I'm a bad man. A surprising first week of the season for both of LA's NFL teams. The Chargers losing home to Miami. The Rams went up to Seattle and put up 30 points on their scoreboard. They also shut out Seattle in the second half to win by 17. The Chargers lose to Miami by 2. They gave up 36 points and 538 yards in total offense. Going to be a long week for the Chargers defense. USC moved up to 5th in this week's AP Top 25 college football rankings. Colorado moved up 4 spots to number 18. The top 4, Georgia, Michigan, Florida State, and Texas. The Dodgers, 32 games over 500, reduced their magic number to 6 to win the NL West title. The Dodgers are back home tonight to start a 3-game series against San Diego. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580 is dedicated to empowering our communities by providing progressive talk radio for our audience. We strive to be an intersectional voice for the voiceless. As a Black-owned and operated station, we are committed to highlighting diverse perspectives and creating safe spaces for meaningful dialogue. We believe that everyone has something unique to bring to these political, economic, social, and cultural conversations, and we don't shy away from the hard conversations about current events. We endeavor to be a beacon of hope and understanding, while boldly challenging listeners to think more deeply about difficult topics that impact us all. With this in mind, our mission statement at KBLA Talk 1580 is simple: to create an inclusive platform that promotes civil discourse through honest dialogue and encourages personal growth among our listeners, so they can become the active agents of change. Our vision is to establish ourselves as the premier radio network with relevant programming across the beloved community, connecting people through shared experiences and collective power for lasting impact beyond these challenging times.
Live from historic Leimert Park in Los Angeles, California, I'm Tavis Smiley, and I'm so glad to see you and me back in stride again. Before we get started with today's show, let me invite you to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at The Real Tavis Smiley and get updates on X, that's formerly Twitter, at Tavis Smiley. By the way, should you miss any part of today's program or want to catch up on previous shows, you can always visit thetavismiley.show.com. That's thetavismiley.show.com. or wherever you get your podcast and listen to the Tavis Smiley podcast at your leisure. Another great show on tap for you today. In our second hour, a conversation with renowned scholar and noted philosopher Dr. Lewis Gordon. Can philosophical insights genuinely contribute to understanding today's complex challenges, or are they simply an unproductive distraction by the academic elite from the immediate hardships that everyday people face? We're going to go deep today in hour 2. Come and go with us when Dr. Lewis Gordon joins us in the next hour. In our third hour today, 2 conversations. Up first, how do we increase Black representation in the government and private sector business contract pipeline? We'll talk about creating a more equitable contract landscape on the top of hour 3 with the founder of Rambo House, Dion Rambo. On the B side of hour 3, a conversation about the transformative power of mind mapping with former pro football player and now successful mortgage executive John Diggs. But we commence today's program talking politics with MSNBC analyst, best-selling author, and Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones Magazine, David Corn. Before we go full throttle with David, though, earlier today we announced a group of new stations carrying the Tavis Smiley Show, for which I am deeply, deeply grateful. Please allow me a moment to welcome WURD Radio 900 AM, 96.1 FM in Philadelphia, and WVON 1690 AM in Chicago. I do not have a language to tell you how humbled I am to be heard in both the Windy City and the city of brotherly love. In little more than a month of national syndication, our radio show is now heard in 3 of the nation's top 5 markets, and trust me, that is no small feat. Our rapid expansion is filling a void for African American and progressive listeners in a growing number of American cities. Indeed, there are additional networks and other affiliates picking up the Tavis Smiley Show this month, including the We Believe radio network of stations in Mississippi, and we want to welcome all of them as well. Of course, none of this syndication expansion would be possible if my hometown station here in L.A., KBLA Talk 1580, had not first placed its seal of approval on our work and witness, so nothing but love for the KBLA delegation. So, wherever and however you're listening to us or watching us for that matter right now, just know that you honor us by tuning in. And so I say once again to all the new affiliates, thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, a conversation with politics with one of the best analysts in the business, David Corn. David, good to have you on. How are you, sir?
Great, Tavis. Good to be with you today. Congratulations on those new stations. I know how much that means to people in the radio business.
It does indeed mean a great deal to expand in the way that we are, and I am, as I said, humbled and grateful for it, and I appreciate your kind words as well, and delighted to have you on as our lead guest today when these new cities are now listening to this fine program. Again, you see David's face all the time on MSNBC. As I said moments ago, he's the Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones Magazine and best-selling author of a great text called American Psychosis. Let me start with this. There's a lot of political news to get to, as there always is the first day of the week, but let me start with Nancy Pelosi. There were a lot of people speculating that when Nancy Pelosi agreed to step down as Speaker, and all 3 of them stepped down, you recall the leadership stepped down, Nancy Pelosi, James Clyburn, Steny Hoyer, they all stepped aside for some younger leadership in the House. And there was speculation that once she stepped down, she'd stick around for this one more term, be an advisor and be a stateswoman, as it were, and then she'd retire. Nancy Pelosi announced the other day that she is running for re-election once again in her San Francisco district. Were you expecting that, David? How did you read that?
Yeah, I mean, it seems that people in power have a hard time giving it up voluntarily. And I don't mean just to, pick on her. We see what's happening with Senator Dianne Feinstein. And, I give Nancy Pelosi a lot of credit for working hard for many years, for getting the Democrats into the majority, being a very capable House Speaker, and dealing with a lot of Republican craziness. She's also raised a ton of money for Democrats across the country. One reason she is very popular within the House Democratic caucus. So I really think she's had a tremendously successful political career, and that it was great for her to step down and make way for new leadership within the House Democrats. And I think that same principle could apply to her remaining in the House as just a regular congressperson. I mean, there's a lot of people and talented political activists and politicians in the San Francisco area, many who are quite progressive, and I think they deserve a shot at elevation, at running for a spot in the House of Representatives. So I think for the same reason that she admirably stepped aside to allow Hakeem Jeffries and others to rise up and become this new generation of Democratic leadership in the House, that she could have done the same regarding her congressional position and remain a close and trusted advisor to Democratic leader Jeffries and the Democratic caucus, and still use her fundraising network to raise money for the Democrats. I don't think whether she's sitting in the House floor or not, makes a big difference in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm not that young myself, but I do think that there is an idea that people need to open up opportunities for those behind them generationally, particularly if you don't need to keep working to make money for a living.
Right.
She does not.
Yeah. Indeed, she does not. We agree on that score, no question about it. Just getting started in this first hour talking politics with David Corn. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
Seeking the truth, speaking the truth. This is the Tavis Smiley Show.
Escalade IQ. This the intro to the all-electric Cadillac perfection like Zoom. And on a full charge, you get 450 miles without the stop. Haiku. This is what I do. Daddy fat intellect since 92. Linked all the way back, panoramic roof. Come with 24-inch rim standard. Ooh, why? Shawty don't kill him. Cadillac diamond in the back, cold chillin'. And when I'm on attack, on the track is no ceiling. Sky's the limit. You hear me? You hear me? Straight drop, no parachutes. Lay lines like a longitude and latitude. Feel it, beloved, clearly, we're hustling. Bustin', truckin'. Cadillac.
For more on the Escalade IQ, visit Cadillac.com.
Available late 2024. GM estimate 450-mile range. On a full charge based on development testing and/or analytical projection. Consistent with NCHA 1634 revision 2017 MCT. Range subject to change prior to production. Annual rates may vary based on service factors, including ambience temperature, terrain, battery age, and condition loading, and how you use and maintain your vehicle.
Extended Family Outreach Ministry presents Praise Fest 2023, Worthy to be Praised Conference and Concert, September 23rd, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. at the Redondo Beach Performing Arts Center. Morning worship, keynote address, and conference featuring women in creative arts ministry and leadership sharing our stories, His glory, giving all praise, honor, thanksgiving, and glory to God. Don't miss the afternoon stand-up and sing praises concert with the Katinas, gospel singer Babby Mason, Three Daughters, and Kevin Click. That's Praise Fest 2023, Worthy to be Praised Conference and Concert, September 23rd, Redondo Beach Performing Arts Center. For more information and tickets, go to PraiseFest 2023 at Eventbrite.com. Plus, for the next 48 hours, use promo code KBLA48 to get your tickets free. You do not want to miss this day of praise. That's PraiseFest 2023 at Eventbrite.com.
For all of us, this generation and the next, there is simply no place in our lives for litter. And yet, it's everywhere we look. And unfortunately, it does belong to all of us. So, let's come together and create a litter-free, clean California, once and for all. Remember to properly dispose of your trash and recycling. Secure truckloads with tarps to keep debris from flying out. Clean out your car when you're at a gas station. Take pride in your community by organizing a cleanup event. Or join a cleanup event near you. Zero litter is the goal. Join us at cleanca.com. That's cleanca.com. Let's do it. Together. Brought to you by Caltrans. cleanca.com.
Ready to re-examine your assumptions and expand your inventory of ideas? More of Tavis Smiley coming your way right now.
Our guest is David Corn. He's the Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones Magazine, best-selling author, and MSNBC analyst. We're talking politics today in this first hour, and there's a lot to get to. We talk about Nancy Pelosi in case you've just tuned in. Many thought that she would step aside once she gave up the speakership. She is not. She's running for re-election once again out of her San Francisco district, and you heard David Corn say he had hoped that she would do gracefully the same thing with her seat that she did with her speakership, and that is step aside and give a new generation a chance to lead. Nancy Pelosi not yet prepared to do that, and clearly, as David says, she doesn't need the money, but she's sticking around nonetheless. Let me jump from the House to the Senate right quick, because that issue, as you know, David, is in play on both sides of the aisle. Pelosi isn't stepping aside, but neither are Mitch McConnell and Dianne Feinstein. I raise that because there's some new data that suggests that most Republicans and Democrats agree that Mitch McConnell's health, we've seen him freeze a number of times now in public, but both the left and the right agree that his health is severely limiting his job abilities. But McConnell has said, he will not step down. Dianne Feinstein, now 90, refuses to step down. Why is that news? Because Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, said on Meet the Press that he has no intention of asking her to step down. And if she does, it's her right, it's her choice. He will not appoint Barbara Lee, the black congresswoman out of Oakland, California, who many had hoped that he would appoint to that seat if, in fact, Dianne Feinstein stepped down. Let me just back up for a second. When Kamala Harris becomes a vice president, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, once again appoints a Latino named Alex Padilla to fill Kamala's seat. A lot of black folk in California and across the country upset about that. It's hard enough for a black woman to get to the U.S. Senate, and Gavin Newsom did not replace her with another black woman. Barbara Lee could have had that seat if Gavin Newsom had made that decision then. He did not. He puts a male a Latino in that particular seat. Now, Dianne Feinstein is in bad health, and many were hoping and thought that Barbara Lee might get the nod. He said this week he will not appoint Barbara Lee to that seat if, in fact, Dianne Feinstein steps down before her term is up next year. So you've got at least two in the Senate who are having great difficulty functioning, but they will not step aside, as Pelosi will not on the House side. Pelosi seems to be in good health. Her mind is sharp as ever. But on the Senate side, this is a serious issue. And there are a lot of things I could ask, given what I've just laid out, David. But broadly speaking, what's your read on these people who are in ill health but will not step aside to make room for new leadership, when in some cases that leadership could be African American?
Well, I do think that Dianne Feinstein should step aside. I think there's been enough reporting indicating that her capabilities are diminished, as one might expect at that age. I mean, I think we don't want to be ageist about this, and people at different ages are able to do different things, and some of us are more fortunate to remain able and bodied and able-minded into 80s and 90s, and others of us do have diminished capabilities. It does seem that Dianne Feinstein is not, faring as well as one would hope and wish for her, and it seems as if it's time for her to leave and give the California voters a representative in the Senate who's up to the task. And I don't know, why she's just hanging on this way, because it just can't end well. It's so much better to go out on your own terms, and she's just not doing that. Mitch McConnell is a little bit of a different case in that he's had these moments in the public, light in which he has frozen, and it has not been fully explained, other than to say it might be the result of a concussion he had a few months ago and the after effects of that. It seems to me that the appropriate thing would be to submit him to an independent, medical examination, neurological examination, and, publish to some degree the findings of that exam. But he's not doing that. He's put out a statement from the Senate doctor who says there's nothing that's inhibiting him from doing his job, although if you freeze in the public, that seems to be somewhat of an indication of a possible problem. But he, too, is not going to step away, it seems. And even if he did, I don't think it would make a big difference in terms of what happens in the Senate.
Yep.
You'd still have the Republicans led by a conservative who was basically held hostage by Donald Trump and the Trump cult.
I guess the question is, just a quick follow-up before I move on, whether or not it's even ageist to ask the question. You mentioned a moment ago that we don't want to be ageist. Indeed, we don't, and I don't think I'm ageist by even asking the question. I take you back to one Ruth Bader Ginsburg. There were those who said we were being ageist, trying to push her off the Supreme Court. No. That was never the argument. That was never the case. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, RBG as they call her, I think made a huge mistake by staying on that court when she knew she was in ill health. Barack Obama called her to the White House and tried gingerly to push her. She would hear none of it, and she fought cancer 3 or 4 times. I mean, at some point we all
no. Yeah. I'm with you 100% on that. I think that was a terrible way for her to end her career. She helped give her seat to Donald Trump and the Republicans.
Exactly.
By hanging on that long. I mean, we see that in a lot of aspects of life. People hang on too long, we always talk about boxers losing their reflexes,
Sure,
right?
sure.
But when it's a Supreme Court justice, particularly, and it leads to a flip of the seat that way, it has ramifications for literally all of us, for hundreds of millions of Americans. That's why I think it is a stain on what would otherwise be the tremendous heroic reputation of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. In the case of Dianne Feinstein and Mitch McConnell, the consequences are not as dramatic.
Sure.
But I do think it would send a better message to people if they made room for others and said they couldn't, there's an issue if they can't fully do their job.
Yep. But is it ageist to even ask these questions?
No, it's not.
Okay.
No. As somebody reaching a point where I see some changes in my own abilities, it's not ageist, but it's ageist to make an assumption that someone can't do something because of their age. It's not ageist to say, we see what's happening in public, we see this stage, and we're asking questions, and voters, who basically, the bosses of politicians have the right to be confident that the people they elect and the people whose salaries they're paying can do that job. It's not ageist if you have someone who works for you who is not showing up or not performing the way you need them to perform, if you have a sit down and say, can you still do this job? But it's ageist to assume they can't. So that's the difference here. And I think with both Mitch McConnell and Dianne Feinstein, they've given us reasons, legitimate reasons, to wonder if they still can do the task at hand.
Yep. Let me talk about two other old white guys, David. And I don't mean you, David Corn. I don't mean you.
Okay.
Let me talk about two other old white guys, and then we'll move on. The first old white guy is a guy named Joseph Biden. And Democrats are expressing extreme frustration with his moribund poll numbers. What do you make of the fact that for all that he has, in fact, accomplished, he's back out on the trail, of course, gearing up for this presidential election season that we're already in the midst of, obviously. But these poll numbers just seem stubborn. They're moribund. They will not move. How do you read that?
Yeah, I think it's a big problem for Biden and the Democrats. I mean, he's been, I think, more successful than people expected, passing bipartisan legislation to get infrastructure, which is really about jobs for people, right? The Inflation Reduction Act had a lot of pro-jobs stuff in it too, and a greener economy and health care measures and so on. Lowering the price of prescription drugs, particularly the most popular ones. It's done a lot for millions of Americans. You have the CHIPS Act, which is creating the building of computer chips in America. We have factories going up throughout the country because of this bill. That's, again, is jobs and helping people with their livelihood. And of course, he's not trying to overthrow the government, impose an authoritarian state the way that Donald Trump wants to. And he's been good on climate change. And his appointments have been very solid. If you look at diversity issues, right, Supreme Court and elsewhere. So I think there's a lot for him to celebrate and to brag about. But for some reason, he's just not able to deliver this, that message or have it be received. The economic numbers are much better now than they were a year ago, but he's not getting credit for that. I don't know whether people are worried about his age or, I think all the right-wing attacks about his age and they say in one breath he's incompetent, then in another breath they say he's corrupt. They don't have evidence of either, but yet they're attacking him. And you see some drops in the polls. You see a decrease in its support amongst Black voters and Latino voters as well for Joe Biden. And, well, I guess the question really is, when the choice comes back, if it comes back to being Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, will these poll numbers at that point, the approval ratings, matter or not? I mean, Donald Trump is still Donald Trump. And the whole issue of, the age, and I mean, Biden's 80, Trump is 77. like everybody else, I would rather have 2 younger candidates and move on to the next generation. But if you just look at them, I mean, Biden's doing the job.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen him on a bicycle. I mean, not to poke fun at Trump, but have you ever seen him on a bicycle? He plays golf, he walks, and he does seem to be obese. And I'm not body shaming here, but in terms of health, there's no reason to believe that Donald Trump is healthier than Joe Biden. And if you listen to his speech patterns, he often says things that don't make sense and then run on sentences. And but the idea that that's being driven by the right wing media is that somehow Biden has lost a step, but Donald Trump is still in his prime.
Yeah.
That's just patently absurd.
No, it is absurd. But my sense is, though, David, the reason there's such deep frustration about Biden's stagnant poll numbers is because despite the strength of the economy, as you mentioned it, despite his legislative accomplishments, these numbers aren't moving, and that is frustrating because there's going to clearly be, there is right now, an enthusiasm gap. And I guess the question is whether or not a guy who moves the way that Joe Biden moves, I mean, the guy's got arthritis, and we know that. But the question is whether or not a guy who moves like Biden moves, very slowly, very gingerly, very tepidly, whether a guy who talks the way that Biden does and often missteps, and, again, he's not the only one. Trump does some of this as well. But can that guy, talking about Biden now, can that guy ever spur enthusiasm? And if he can't, then why is he the guy at the top of the ticket? Because that's the concern. The concern is going to be, turnout. That's the issue, turnout. And so again, I ask, can that guy ever spur any kind of enthusiasm?
Well, I guess that's the question. I mean, he did in 2020 when he was still old and not as vibrant as some other candidates.
Right.
FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was wheelchair, and it was a total different era then. And politics is always about the choice. It's not about whether we rarely get perfect candidates. We never get perfect candidates.
Yeah, of course.
And so it's one person versus another person. And so the enthusiasm as it came in 2020 was not so much for Biden, but it was a version, a disgust with Donald Trump that helped drive a lot of that. And that certainly is not going to go away or fade away. But politics, you don't get the choices that you want, and it's a matter of okay, is someone going to run against Biden? I mean, is some Democrat going to challenge him and run against him? And at the end of the day, would that person do better against Donald Trump if they manage to win, or if they lose, will they end up hurting Joe Biden before his general election fight with Donald Trump or another Republican? I mean, it's easy to say, he's not my ideal. I wish he was more energetic. I wish, he was young. It's easy to say that, but the question then is, okay, then what? The Democratic Party, as you know, is barely an organized entity. It doesn't have the ability to say, we think Biden is too old, therefore we think Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan should be the candidate. No, those people have to decide they're going to run against an incumbent president, which almost never works out for the challenger or the party.
Fair enough.
So if Gavin, Newsom, your governor out there decides he's not going to do this, there's nothing that the Democratic Party can do, and voters are left with the choice they have.
I take your point. You mentioned Roosevelt a moment ago, and the minute you said his name, my mind went to Jesse Jackson, who, of course, ran admirably in both 1984 and 1988. And Jesse's had so many great lines in his career. The Parkinson's that he is now wrestling with is slowing him down. But there's so many great lines in Jesse Jackson's storied political career. But one of the best has to be his line that I'd rather have Roosevelt in a wheelchair than Reagan on a horse. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
Hope, agency, dignity. This is Tavis Smiley.
Can you dig it? Come on!
If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found benefitscheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. BenefitsCheckup.org.
My daughter was diagnosed with a rare malignant rhabdoid tumor on the spine. They sent her straight to St. Jude. My hope was gone. But when you get there, everyone's like, hey, we're not going to give up. And when you see other people not giving up on your child, that makes all the difference in the world. When I found out I didn't have to pay, I was just grateful. They saved my baby's life.
Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Moore. Thank you for sharing a part of your Monday with us here on the Black Information Network. President Biden is marking the 9/11 terrorist attacks at a memorial ceremony in Alaska after wrapping up a trip overseas. Biden will meet later today with first responders and military members at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Anchorage. He's returning home from the G20 summit in India and a visit to Vietnam. Michigan State University's football coach is being suspended without pay following harassment allegations. The school made the announcement yesterday as it investigates claims that Mel Tucker sexually harassed a rape activist and sexual assault awareness speaker during a phone call last year. The allegations come after Tucker, who was African American, signed a 10-year, $95 million contract. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Going to be busy as you travel South LA. We're seeing a top in Inglewood and Van Nuys. A tough commute as you travel away from the valley into West LA. 405 South, the slow drive starts at Victory, up and over the hill all the way to Sunset, the busy drive. Inglewood, it's a wreck on the 405 North as you get to the 105. Two left lanes take it up with a collision. That slow drive as far back as Rosecrans. South LA on the 105 West. West 105 just before Vermont, a wreck in the center divider. Busy here from Paramount. And North Hollywood, the NoHo area, the 170 South at Riverside Drive. Stalled vehicle clear to the right shoulder.
Summer days getting shorter and business to-do lists getting longer? You need Indeed. Their all-in-one hiring solution makes it easy to attract, interview, and hire candidates all in one place. Sponsor your first job and get hiring today by visiting Indeed.com/credit.
Want to save on new blinds? Blindster.com offers custom blinds, shades, and shutters at prices less than big box retailers. Order 10 free samples of any product and we'll ship them to you for free. And right now, save 50% off any order during our Labor Day sale. Blindster.com.
Is this the This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
I'm a bad man. A surprising first week of the season for both of LA's NFL teams. The Chargers losing home to Miami. The Rams went up to Seattle and put up 30 points on their scoreboard. They also shut out Seattle in the second half to win by 17. The Chargers lose to Miami by 2. They gave up 36 points and 538 yards in total offense. Going to be a long week for the Chargers defense. USC moved up to 5th in this week's AP Top 25 college football rankings. Colorado moved up 4 spots to number 18. The top 4, Georgia, Michigan, Florida State, and Texas. The Dodgers, 32 games over 500, reduced their magic number to 6 to win the NL West title. The Dodgers are back home tonight to start a 3-game series against San Diego. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
Dominique DePrima for KBLA Talk 1580. Are you worried about your credit score? Well, look, you can rebuild it. There are lots of factors that go into determining your credit score, but one of the most effective ways to improve your score is to consistently pay your bills on time, over time. If you're forgetful about payments like me, try automating your bill payments. That way all your creditors get paid on time and you'll have freed yourself of trying to remember. Whatever your financial goals, U.S. Bank Access Commitment Initiatives can help support you in reaching them. Access your financial goals at usbank.com/access. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
Hello, I'm Will Jimeno. I'm a retired Port Authority police detective and a 9/11 survivor. For 13 hours, I was buried under the rubble of the World Trade Center. I was rescued thanks to brave people who were willing to put their own lives on the line to save mine. For 9/11 this year, a National Day of Service, I'll be paying it forward by taking time to help others. Please join me by doing your own good deed that day. Visit 911day.org to learn more.
Hey, this is Zoe Williams, the voice of reason from KBLA Talk 1580. Listen, if you're in the market for the best prices and the fastest delivery for custom-made roller shade, LA Custom Blinds is the place to be. Schedule a free estimate and they will come to your house, measure your windows, and bring a variety of fabrics to choose from. And then come back and install it all for free. The best part is that their factory is located right here in downtown Los Angeles, so they make the shades really fast. All you gotta do is go to lacustomblinds.com and schedule your free in-home estimate right now. Tell them Zoe Williams sent you.
Who do you trust to get at the truth? Tavis Smiley. That's who. The conversation continues right now.
He does indeed. Our guest in this hour is David Korn. He is the Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones Magazine, which I love to read, best-selling author of a brilliant text called American Psychosis, and, of course, you see him regularly as an analyst on MSNBC. In case you just tuned in, we started our program today acknowledging some new stations that are carrying this program around the country. We are pleased to be on WURD Radio in Philadelphia, WVON in Chicago, another great radio network in Mississippi, a network of affiliate stations who are carrying our program there, We Believe Radio. So it's a great day around here on this program, a day of celebration that the program is expanding its listenership around the nation in the midst of this critical presidential election season. So there's a day of celebration here in our studio. But across the country, David, as you know, it's also a day of reflection because the calendar reads 9/11. And so, believe it or not, it was 22 years ago today that we all saw those attacks on our nation in 3 different places, in Pennsylvania, of course, in Washington, the Pentagon, and, of course, in New York City. So 3 different locales impacted on this date 22 years ago. There are a number of questions to ask about that, David. Of course, what comes out of that is this U.S.-led global war on terror, which I want to interrogate 22 years later with you. The attacks, of course, killed 2,977 people, almost 3,000 people killed in those attacks 22 years ago. And there's always, of course, memorials and celebrations on this day, David, but it's like anything else in history. The farther and farther you get away from it, the less and less impact it has. It occurred to me this morning when I was preparing to come on the air today that there's a whole new generation of young folk who weren't even around when this happened 22 years ago. Mm-hmm. So as you look back on it, again, 22 years later, your thoughts, broadly speaking, I got a couple of follow-ups I want to ask, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. I mean, of course, like anyone old enough, I remember to think about where I was that day, which was on Capitol Hill. My office was literally across the Senate office buildings, and people poured out into the streets during the chaos, before we knew what had happened. And it turns out that Flight 93, which went down in the field in Pennsylvania, probably was heading towards the U.S. Capitol. And I was on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol. And so, I quickly helped evacuate my building and then got as far from the Capitol as I could because one of the officers told me that they thought the plane was heading towards Capitol Hill. And so on a day like today, I reflect very personally on Flight 93. Mm-hmm. The passengers and the crew were able to bring that plane down so it didn't hit the target it did, without being overly dramatic about it. My life and the lives of others in Capitol Hill, or maybe wherever that plane was supposed to go, were saved by the heroic actions of these people. So I try to, think about them and keep them and their loved ones and their, survivors and relatives in mind on a day like today. But then, I also think, that 9/11 just triggered so many bad policy decisions. Mm-hmm. The worst of all, of course, being the invasion of Iraq, the invasion of Iraq that had nothing to do with the attack of 9/11, mm-hmm. And we know I wrote a book called Hubris about how Bush, sold the war with lies and false statements about Iraq and WMDs. We all know about that, and we know that we lost several thousand American service men and women in that war, which really I don't think produced any positive outcomes. But the thing that we also don't, I think, keep in mind as much is that in the war and the aftermath and the chaos and the civil war that came after the invasion, at least 200,000 Iraqi civilians, I'm not talking about people in the military, but Iraqi civilians were killed in the violence that was unleashed by our invasion of Iraq. So, I mean, these are all connected, and I try to keep this all in mind, and hopefully, we've learned some lessons since then, but maybe not enough.
I want to focus just a second here on this so-called global war on terror that we've been fighting since then. Before I do that, since you mentioned the book that you'd written about George Bush, I love that book, The Lies of George W. Bush. It was a powerful text when it came out. I think still is worth looking back on to really get a sense of what happened during that moment. The book is called The Lies of George W. Bush by David Cohen. A couple questions in that regard. One specifically about Bush, but one more broadly about the presidency. The presidency first. Question first. What do you make of the fact that Bush did, in fact, just flat out lie repeatedly to the American people? And fast forward a number of years in the Trump era, lying to the American people has been normalized, as it were, in the presidency. Yep. How do you read that?
Yeah, well, you mentioned the book I wrote at the beginning of the Iraq War. Afterwards, Michael Isikoff and I wrote a book called Hubris, which was focused just on the Bush administration's campaign to sell the war and the invasion and to support it with false statements and lies. And I think I'm tremendously proud of that book. 2 decades later, it still stands up as I think one of the key texts in understanding how we got into that war and how it was an avoidable war and was greased by lies. And unfortunately, even in 2004, it's, a year after the war began, over 50% of American voters said they believed that Bush had lied the U.S. into the war, but yet Bush still managed to win re-election in 2004, which I think was was terrible for the country because it showed there was no price to be paid for what he did, and now he's considered an elder statesman, and people fawn over him for his paintings, and he's never really had to answer for this horrific war that took so many American and Iraqi lives. But you're right, the lies that he did, he kind of were slippery and a lot of spin.
Yeah.
I mean, Donald Trump, according to the Washington Post, while president, made at least 30,000 false statements or lies, if you want to call them that, and he still, was 74 million Americans still vote for him. He lies all the time about everything, big issues, small issues, his height, his weight. It just doesn't matter. He says the economy was the best economy ever in American history. That's a lie. It's not true. He lies about his COVID response. He lies about his past business successes. And it doesn't matter to his supporters. And the only way I can process that is to sort of say that for them, Trump has become a theology, a religion.
Yeah.
People don't question their religious beliefs. It's a matter of faith. You can't, if you're a Muslim, if you're a Christian, if you're Jewish, you can't prove what the Bible or the Quran or the New Testament says that you believe. There's no evidence. There's no record of that. You take it on faith and you decide to be a believer, and that's fine. But that's what faith and religion is all about. It's faith in things unseen. But what's happened is, with Trump's supporters, a lot of them, not all, but a lot of them, they have taken that same process and applied it to politics and applied it to this failed casino operator who is a racist and a misogynist. And he always speaks the truth.
Yep.
He can't do anything wrong. And there is he lost an election, so there was a price to be paid, but he still is at the top of the Republican Party and still the leader of the conservative movement.
You answered the first of the two questions I said I wanted to ask. The first was about the presidency and how lying has become normalized when it comes to addressing the American people. The second question I want to come to straight away when we come forward, and that's a question specifically about George W. Bush. And you already jumped ahead of me, which is not a problem. You are not just brilliant, but you're a psychic as well, because you know exactly what I wanted to ask. And it's about George Bush's poll numbers today. His poll numbers are quite nice, in the 60s a day. His approval numbers, number one. To your point, he did all that lying, all those Iraqi lives, innocent lives lost, and yet he got reelected in 2004. Michelle Obama, who sits next to him whenever there's a meeting, a funeral or something, some state event of all the former presidents, because of the order, Michelle Obama ends up sitting next to George W. Bush, and she has said repeatedly, I just love him. That's Michelle Obama. I just love him. What do you make of that? You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
What's your quarrel with the world? You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont, a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
Hi, it's Tavis Smiley. KBLA Talk 1580 is inviting you to join us on Saturday, September 16th, 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. for our very first economic empowerment event for the community. This event is free and is powered by Caltrans. We're doing this in association with Rambo House, and here's Rambo to tell you more.
Contracts. I'm going to say it again for all of us small business owners out there. Contracts. Rambo House, KBLA, Tavis, me. Oh my God, this is going to be massive. I truly thank Caltrans for giving us the opportunity to focus on contracts. Listen, that's what it's all about to be a small business in LA. That's how we hire our own. That's how we expand our community is contracts. KBLA1580.com is for you to have a seat at our contracts-focused event. Contract Ready does it again. We had over 900 last time. So you guys know how exciting this is. And if you just think that you want to get into contracts and you're close to it, bring your friends out for September 16th at the Marriott Hotel. Listen, you know where to register. KBLA1580.com. Come see me. I can't wait to see you. Let's do it, Tavis.
So be sure to go to KBLA1580.com for all the details. We'll see you Saturday, September 16th.
Extreme heat can make you very sick and can be deadly. For Californians 65 and over, it's important to have a plan. Ask your healthcare provider if your medications affect your ability to cool down. Know the signs of heat illness and stroke, as well as the location of your nearest cooling center or air-conditioned space. And if you have loved ones over 65, be sure to check in on them on hot days. Learn how to stay safer from extreme heat at heatreadyca.com. Brought to you by the state of California.
You are now in Big Tobacco's Fantasyland. Welcome. It's a healthier world where they want you to believe that vaping makes quitting cigarettes a breeze. Never mind the evidence that vaping leads to using both. And if you're younger, even better, teens who vape are 3 times likelier to use cigarettes. In Big Tobacco's Fantasyland, the deadliest industry is your friend.
Big Tobacco's idea of smoke-free is a dangerous fantasy for us all. See reality at undo.org.
Smart talk for curious people just like you. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
My time's getting tight. Let me move assiduously and aggressively and quickly to get a couple more responses from David Korn. David, George W. Bush left office with some of the worst poll numbers ever. In fact, they were the worst poll numbers ever on record for any president departing the White House at the time. My sense is that some of the way we see George W. Bush in real time, 22 years after 9/11, is the way we see him through, how might I put this, through a revisionist lens, has something, I think, to do with Donald Trump coming after him. And so now there's sort of a comparative analysis, and George W. Bush, many of us believe, was nowhere near as bad as Donald Trump. But that doesn't mean that George Bush should get away with what he was not held accountable for. And again, you've got folk, including Michelle Obama, who say, I just love him. How do you read that 22 years later?
Yeah, well, I hate to agree with you here, but I agree with you here. Things often look less worse in the rearview mirror. I guess that's why women give childbirth the second time. You forget the pain, and I do think that Donald. I say that as a man, so I realize that.
Yes.
And compared to Donald Trump, George W. Bush, was not as assiduous a liar and a more likable human being. But I do think it's part of the problem with America. Gore Vidal, the novelist, once said we should be called the United States of Amnesia.
Exactly.
That we forget the past. We forget the past, whether it's about Tulsa, and we forget the past about Vietnam. We make the same mistakes over and over again, and so it's very hard to keep in mind what George W. Bush did. And speaking of the past, I wanted to say that tomorrow, the book that you've mentioned, American Psychosis, a historical investigation how the Republican Party went crazy, comes out in an expanded paperback edition, which means it's cheaper than it used to be. and the book is a 70-year look at the Republican Party for the last 7 decades, has again and again encouraged and exploited right-wing extremism. And what Trump is doing seems different or feels different or looks different, but actually if you go back and look at McCarthyism, the Southern strategy, the New Right, the Religious Right, the Tea Party, Newt Gingrich, Sarah Palin, birtherism, you see that it's always been there. It's always been part of the Republican project.
Yeah.
And so I wrote this book, and as I say, it's coming out tomorrow in paperback edition. I wrote this book, American Psychosis, to show people that you got to know the history. To understand today, you got to not just know it, but remember it.
Yeah.
And to me, that's just really important.
The book does, in fact, come out tomorrow in paperback. It's called American Psychosis, a historical investigation of how the Republican Party went crazy. We had David on this program, and the book came out, once again, out tomorrow in paperback on September the 12th. When we come forward, 2 other things I want to get David's temperature on before I lose him at the top of the hour. One being the global war on terror and how we're doing in that so-called fight. Secondly, I have to read this one message from a particular listener and get David's response to the listener. And speaking of George Bush, somebody once said, if you live long enough, you either become the hero or the villain. You're listening to Tavis, Smiley.
Interrogating and unpacking. That's what we do around here. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
What's up, party people? It's your favorite MC's favorite rapper, MC Light here. And we're celebrating 50 years of hip-hop, authentically powered by Cadillac. And we're going to take it way back to where it started. It was only fitting that hip-hop began with teenagers at a back-to-school jam in the rec room of a South Bronx apartment complex by an 18-year-old brother. By the way, I'm also sure he had a Cadillac parked outside. He noticed the energy on the dance floor when he switched between 2 turntables, extending the beats, repeating the breaks, and never losing the rhythms. And that was the birth of hip-hop. And from that moment, it took off.
For more on how Cadillac is celebrating hip-hop's 50th, visit Cadillac.com/audacity.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Tired of being locked out of job opportunities and shut down by systemic racism? KBLA stands with you in fighting for the rights of black workers, and we don't black down. The Los Angeles Black Workers Center is a dynamic alliance of workers, organized labor, community-based organizations, clergy, students, and scholars, working collectively to improve the position of the black working class. The LA Black Workers Center takes a comprehensive approach to addressing the black jobs crisis. Their programs promote access to quality jobs, racial equity in hiring and retention, discrimination-free job sites, and they prepare black workers for employment in high-wage, career-track jobs. The Black Workers Center supports workers who need help protecting their rights on the job. They give workers access to quality jobs and remove systemic barriers to employment. To sign up for free career readiness training, get involved in organizing around anti-discrimination, learn about union apprenticeship programs, or sign on to a trade registry, please visit www.lablackworkerscenter.org. That's lablackworkerscenter.org. Together, we can beat the black jobs crisis. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
My ride smells just right, just right, just right, just right.
Y'all gotta try that Febreze car.
just right, just right, just right. La 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 la. With up to 40 days of consistency, all over Breeze car clips right on your vent. You know my car's my happy place. Keep that smile on my face when it smells just right, just right, just right. Yeah, breathe happy for Breeze. La 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 la.
Let's get back to more of Tavis Smiley right now.
David, I got less than 5 minutes here, and I want to do 2 or 3 things right quick. So let me see if we together can't move through these things. One, I have to read this message to you from a particular listener. I wonder, Tavis, to what extent, if any, the tepid enthusiasm for Biden has to do with America itself. In response to a highly qualified black male, Obama, America ushered in a wholly incompetent, unqualified, and unabashedly racist Trump. Not only did he not become qualified as a result of being on the job, but he left wholly corrupt. Ours is not the most educated, enlightened, well-read country, Republican, Democrat, or otherwise. So, as I listened to David discuss the list of the Biden administration's accomplishments, I think we live in an America that always wants to be entertained. And Auntie Kamala's hip-hop anniversary party and her dancing to Vibrant Thing ain't enough. America is not given to analysis. It takes time to read beyond short text and treats life like a movie where now you have to do something sensational at the top to capture the audience's attention at the bottom, or they check out and they're on to the next thing. Your response right quick.
That guy or that woman should be on the show.
I think they are. We just put him on the show, yeah.
I mean, that's a very astute analysis. I don't disagree with anything there. I think we have a hard time in the country dealing with things that are real, like climate change, and we get distracted by sideshows and carnival barkers, and Trump knows that, and that's how he became president, by making it a reality show, making the presidential campaign a reality show, and that, people, I just see in the headlines today, there are stories about how Biden looked tired on this diplomatic trip he took. But it was 40 hours, and at the end of it, I can tell you, every reporter was tired
exactly.
too, having covered these sort of
exactly.
things. So, why focus on that as opposed to what he did or didn't do?
Yep. She goes on to say, I wonder if Michelle Obama, or Ellen for that matter, have loved ones or friends who died because of that bogus war that Bush got America into. Privilege has a way of separating people from those living ordinary lives. And to that, I simply say amen. In the 2 minutes we have left, 22 years after 9/11, your read on how we are doing in this so-called global war on terror that we are leading.
Well, I think it's not a very big part of the narrative these days. I think, what we never really figured out what we were doing in Afghanistan, right? We never really knew we were building or helping democracy, whether we could or we couldn't, and it ended up with a very messy ending that I think is, burdened Biden ever since, even though Trump sort of set the stage for it, and we've never gotten over that. And so we still, don't really know how to, handle our military commitments overseas. Our military budget is way too big, and we, and I think we've just kind of, in some ways, moved on, but allowed a lot of these things to stay in place at high levels of funding, and that's not a good thing.
Yeah. And whether Republican or Democrat takes the oath of office the next time around, is it your sense that once again we will see the military budget increase as it always does?
Oh yeah, it's virtually untouchable. I mean, you can get a nick here, a nick there, but we've never really reassessed how much we're spending, or that we should be spending all that much. And there are some programs that definitely should be trashed that could save tens of billions, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars.
David Corn is the Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones Magazine, one of my favorite periodicals to read. I highly recommend it. If you've never checked out Mother Jones, you should. He is a on-air analyst for MSNBC, so you hear his voice today, but you know his face when you see it. And he's a best-selling author of a book called American Psychosis, a historical investigation of how the Republican Party went crazy. Love that title, how they went crazy. And it releases in paperback tomorrow, Tuesday, September 11th. But today, September 12th, tomorrow, Tuesday the 12th. But on today, the 22nd anniversary of 9/11, we say thank you to David Corn for joining this program. David, good to have you on. We'll do it again, my friend. All the best to you.
Thank you so much, Tavis.
More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Moore. Thank you for sharing a part of your Monday with us here on the Black Information Network. President Biden is marking the 9/11 terrorist attacks at a memorial ceremony in Alaska after wrapping up a trip overseas. Biden will meet later today with first responders and military members at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Anchorage. He's returning home from the G20 summit in India and a visit to Vietnam. Michigan State University's football coach is being suspended without pay following harassment allegations. The school made the announcement yesterday as it investigates claims that Mel Tucker sexually harassed a rape activist and sexual assault awareness speaker during a phone call last year. The allegations come after Tucker, who was African American, signed a 10-year $95